This is week 9, and we read about the mind and brain, and we also watched some videos on that. One of the videos was with Dr. Laura Boyd, and she said that even when you're at rest and thinking of nothing, your brain is highly active. This has been found through things like MRIs, EEGs, PET scans, or EKG. One thing I know for a fact that my son was having seizures when he was very little, and we had taken him up to Le Bonheur, and they hooked him up to a machine that showed how active his brain was, and he was actually given a pill to go to sleep for just a little while. It was amazing because his brain was extremely active, and he was probably about 5 or 6 when this happened. One of the things, and he was already going to Head Start, so he was getting an education as well, and that the seizures did not seem to affect his brain at all. I mean, not in a negative way. So I found that to be very interesting, and he was very intelligent, in my opinion. We also have learned that the brain has got neuroplasticity, and that is every time you learn something new, it changes your brain. I thought that was really interesting too. We used to be told, and I know in school I was told, that we only use 20% of our brain. That was a myth from many years ago, I'm guessing. It turns out that probably came about because of what's called silent areas, which are the cerebral cortex has got those, that it consists of the silent areas, and the areas are not activated. This was kind of a direct quote. The silent areas are not activated by sensory or motor activity. We now, through the studies, we know that the silent areas mediate higher cognitive functions, not directly coupled to sensory or motor activity. Another thing that we read about was an experiment with some rats. There were rats that were part of there were different groups of rats. There was one group that was basically an obstacle course, and they ran a elevated obstacle course, and those rats ended up becoming really good at doing the obstacle course. Then you had a group of rats that had to do mandatory exercise, and they had a treadmill, and they were made to walk or run on the treadmill for 30 minutes, then they got a break for 10, and then they went back and did it for 30 more minutes. The third group of rats were called voluntary exercises, and what that was they had a activity wheel that was hooked up to their cage somehow, or it was attached to the cage, and they used it pretty often. So, and then there was the last group, and they the reading called it cage potato rats, and they didn't have any exercise at all. Well, in finding this out, they the mandatory exercises and the voluntary exercisers showed higher densities of blood vessels than either the cage or the potato rats. But it goes on, our reading goes on to say that the rats that were not that were acrobats, the first ones, they were the standout group. So we learned that exercise does not add synopsis, but learning does. And I thought that was very interesting. We even watched a video on unlearning things, and that was about the bike that had the different, when you turned the wheel to the right, or the bars to the right, the wheel went to the left, and it took someone who was an expert rider, as far as he been riding a regular bike for many, many years, and it took him it took him several months to learn how to operate that bike, that the wheel went the opposite direction. Then he had a son who had just been riding a bike for probably about 2 or 3 years, and it didn't take him near as long to learn how to operate the other bike. And then the gentleman who had been an expert bike rider to begin with, and who learned how to ride the backwards bike, went back, and it took him a little while to relearn what he had always known.